On this episode of the show, I have with me Ashok Krishnamurthi. He is managing partner at Great Point Ventures, and we're going to be talking about legacy as a venture capitalist. We're going to ask Ashok what that means. What does he want to be known for whenever he does step away from the role of being in venture capital? And we'll talk about some of the problems that he's interested in solving, how it shapes his investment philosophy, and we'll talk a little bit about those first principle problems and what he's seeing out in the market. Ashok, I appreciate your time.
Amir, pleasure. Good morning. Looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. All right, before we start, Great Point Ventures, tell us a little bit about you guys.
Yeah, so Great Point Ventures, San Francisco-based venture fund. Actually, the fund was named after the Great Point Lighthouse in Nantucket, for those of you who want to know. It was started in 2015 by two of my partners, Ray Lane and Andrew Perlman. Ray is pretty well known in the Valley and actually in the tech circles. He was president of Oracle. In fact, he was the guy who took Oracle from about $4 billion to $220 billion in market cap, and then joined Kleiner Perkins as a managing partner before starting Great Point Ventures. And Andrew Perlman, if you look him up, he's a serial entrepreneur who made Forbes 30 under 30, really accomplished entrepreneur. The fund itself, we are an early stage venture capital firm, which means the following. We tend to invest in seed, Series A. Once in a while, we'll do Series B. At the end of the day, we are all operators. When we started the fund, the thesis was, let's try to bring our operational experience to bear. That, in a nutshell, is Great Point Ventures.
There we go. Love it. This episode, we'll be talking a little bit about what it means to you. You've spent some time in venture capital. We always hear about certain aspects of the VC world. I have to be honest. I've interviewed a number of people in VC. I don't think I've asked the question, and I guess maybe we'll start off at the top. So you've been doing this for a while. Whenever you decide to call it a career, you decide you want to step away from the day-to-days of being in venture capital. What is it you want to be known for? What type of investor do you want to be known to, as a legacy for yourself?
Great question. Look, let me maybe rewind and give you why I became a venture capitalist. I think that'll be important to answer the question. Look, I'm an immigrant to this country. I came here to do my master's in computer science, and then started working in the usual, tech companies in the Valley. I was an early engineer at Apple. I, in fact, designing the CPU for the handheld called the Newton, which was a precursor to the iPhone, for those people who want to know. The project got canceled, and as any self-respecting engineer would do, I got a little miffed and joined Sun Microsystems as an early engineer, since Scott McNealy, who was the CEO at that time, decided not to rely on Motorola for their CPUs, for their computer systems, and wanted to design his own CPU. And so I was fortunate to have joined Sun, designing the next generation superscalar processor, which obviously changed the fortunes of the company. And then, after about 4 years at Sun, I realized I'm just not a big company guy. I want to do something different and innovative. And during my journey at both Apple and at Sun, we used to use tools that I believed at that time were pretty clunky. So myself and a few folks decided, we needed to go start a company. And I joined a group that started a company called Redwood Design Automation, which was building EDA tools to accelerate chip designs. The company was acquired by Cadence. And Amir, once you start your first company or are part of a company that has a decent exit, it becomes like a drug. You want to do it again. So I became an early team member at a company called Juniper Networks, which took on the 800-pound gorilla called Cisco. Did very, very well. Was there for about 10 or 11 years. Ran a lot of development for Juniper Networks, and then realized again that I'm just not a big company guy. The company was valued at its peak at $70 billion and, was a great success by any measure. In fact, it was the biggest return for Kleiner Perkins ever, 2,700x return for Kleiner Perkins. But I still had the entrepreneurial bug in me. I was fairly young at that time, and so started my next company called Zigo Systems, which was virtualizing data centers. And I wanted to solve for a problem which was interconnects in data centers, which if you look back, you have a plethora of wires in data centers, and most of the wires are sitting silent and not being used unless you're running some load. And said, why couldn't you just run things across one wire, which was the thesis, a very, very hard first principles problem. And please note the word first principles, because I'll tie it in with something which I love to talk about. And so the company was very successful. It was acquired by Oracle. Zigo was acquired by Oracle. Now, what happened was, when this company was started by me and coincidentally, my two brothers. It was a family affair by some extent, but we took venture money from Kleiner Perkins, from Coastline Ventures, and a whole bunch of others. Unfortunately, about a few months after the company was started, my dad got diagnosed with cancer and passed away very quickly. And that was a shock to the family and shock to me. My dad was my best friend. It really affected me. And I wanted to do something in that space of the intersection of computer science and healthcare. Healthcare is the largest industry, or one of the largest industries in the United States, about $4 trillion, give or take. And so that bug came into me of doing something myself. So I actually endowed a professorship at Stanford, besides professorships at a bunch of other institutions, very well-known institutions, with the goal of saying, why can't we take two very different disciplines? And we all swim in our swim lanes, right? As I told you, I'm a computer scientist. I don't know much about medicine and cancer, but growing up in India, my parents forced us to learn biology. And I'm so glad they did that, right? In high school. And I realized that there could be something with the data that's generated from sequencing. And so I started this company called Cap Medical with two professors from Stanford. Extremely successful, was acquired by Roche. And then I realized that, you know what, my skill sets are better used giving people money who have brilliant ideas. And I have to be the first to confess, the people are way smarter than I am on this planet. And I got very lucky with this journey that I just explained to you. And so we started investing out of our family fund. Would look at companies, and I would take them to the usual friends of mine in the Valley, people like Ray Lane or Mark Benioff, who, was running Salesforce, but would say, this is an interesting company. So in 2015, I took a company to Ray and said, Ray, we should invest in this together. Ray turned around and said, why don't you come meet me in San Francisco? And I live in a city called Saratoga, which is in the South Bay. It's about an hour away. And I said, that's a long drive. I'm not coming. He said, I'll buy you lunch. That was the hook, a cheap lunch. I landed up in San Francisco, and sitting in the room was Ray and now my partner, Andrew. And they said, well, we're starting this fund. We'd like you to be part of it. And I said, thank you, but no thank you. I don't want to be a venture capitalist. And they looked at me like, I shot them on a public street. And I said, look, I'm really honored you want me to do this, but I have to be honest with myself. Being a venture capitalist is very different than being a CEO. Very, very different. You have to learn to check your ego at the door, because it's a partnership. That's why it's called venture capital and then partners, right, to a large extent. And I don't know if I can do that. I have to be honest with myself. I want to do something only if I know I can be successful. But for those people who know Ray, highly persuasive guy, he picked up the phones to my wife, and I got convinced that, let me apprentice this job. Because before that, as I told you, Amir, I had been investing out of our fund, and I had one LP, my wife. It was easy, right? I would tell her I'd invest. She said, well, just don't lose our money. I would say, fine. But in this case, you're taking LP money, a limited partner money, and you have to be very serious about things you invest in, and you want to try to be successful. I mean, it's not guaranteed success, but you have to be able to prosecute things that you see. So 6 months into apprenticing at Great Point, I realized that surrounding myself with people who are way smarter than I am is the way to invest. So that is my journey into becoming a venture capitalist. And so, I've been doing this for about 10 years now at Great Point Ventures. I'm loving every bit of it. But to answer your question, I don't want to leave a legacy, and I'll pause here and then let you ask me the next question.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of questions in there. I mean, that's such a fantastic story. I mean, maybe a piece of advice, because I think you have been a serial entrepreneur. You founded in multiple exits and different types of structures, different types of businesses. You're in the VC space now, and you see a lot of people after an exit go into being a VC. And I understand, right? You want to put the capital to work. You can find smart people. I don't think it's easy to be a serial entrepreneur. I know a lot of people are humble and they say, I got lucky, and it was good fortune. I'm like, okay, maybe once or twice, but if you do it 3, 4, or 5 times, I'm not sure luck is. When you look at yourself and you reflect on that, and you look at how you look at the people that come to you now and their positioning for investment, can you use a lot of your own background? I mean, is there pattern matching that happens, or do you have to be net neutral and go, everybody is unique in how they're going to go be a founder and an entrepreneur?
Yeah, look, everybody is unique. It's a learning experience. Being a venture capitalist and, being somewhat successful, I'm still learning, to be completely honest, right? I'm learning on this interview, right? Okay, I'm learning, why is Amir asking me this question, and I'm trying to compute in my head. But, I think as especially an early stage venture capitalist, I think what I would try to focus on is the jockey, not the horse. Right? You're investing because people have brilliant ideas. Everyone's idea is a brilliant idea. If nothing else, in their heads, it is brilliant, right? They wouldn't be doing it. Why would I want to go spend, inordinate amount of my time, my resources, if I don't think I'm going to be successful? So you have to give them that credit. So, but now you have to parse from them, are they the right jockey? That's an art. That's not a science, and you get that only if you have enough scars on your back. And what that means is you have to surround yourself with people who are constantly educating you, trying to tell you, give me a reason to invest, not give me a reason not to invest. Very important. I think a lot of people in the business find it very easy to come up with reasons not to invest. I take a contrarian view. I have to, when I have my conversation, I want to look for, at least give me myself one reason to invest. And from there, you add the right fertilizer, you add the right, water, and hope it grows. So that's the one advice I would give.
That's fantastic. You referenced first principle thinking. Obviously, some of the problems that you mentioned, healthcare, which is obviously ginormous. You mentioned, we talked about networking and chip design. I mean, when you look at first principle problems, I mean, they are large. They are sometimes a little more complex to find simple solutions. When you look at first principle problems, and you're looking at investing in those type of companies, I understand. Look at the Jockey. Understand whether or not they can bring this out. Is there something within the problem they're trying to solve in terms of how they're trying to be able to deconstruct the true issue at hand and solving that? Because that seems very hard, right? And when people do get something right, you see it. You see the idea, it blows up, and we all look back 20 years later and go, oh my God, well, this person, at the time might have seemed like they didn't know what they were trying to do, but they came true in their mind. But when you as an investor look at that and you're looking for those type of solutions, I understand the jockey and understand the problem, but it's almost as though you have to understand some aspects of that market. And is there a problem that can be solved at that level by this group of people?
Yeah, look, a great question. I don't think, a venture capitalist has to be a subject matter expert in everything that they listen to. It's impossible, right? I mean, I would be ChatGPT if that would be the case. So, but you should have in your mind some kind of a thesis to start with. And then you try to validate that thesis with other people, subject matter experts. And I'll walk you through an example or two if that'll be helpful, right? I mean, I explained cancer diagnostics, right? So, it doesn't need, one doesn't need to be a rocket scientist that the cost of sequencing was dropping. You sequence the DNA or the RNA, you get digital data. Now, we are all slaves of our education and our trade, right? I'm a computer scientist, so when I look at digital data, I say, I look at zeros and ones. A physician may look at, a human being and say, I need a scalpel in my hand, right? But can you put the two together? And that would be the definition of first principle problem. Can you take something from a very different field, take something from a very other different field, and put them together, and can that solve a problem? And in this case, cost of sequencing was dropping. You get digital data. Machines are way better at looking at data, inferring signal from data, than humans. And, we get tired. Machines never get tired. Our baud rates, meaning at the rate at which we can ingest data, is very poor as a human. Machines don't have that problem. So if you can put the two together, you can now look for signal, in this case, cancer signal. And if you can try to diagnose cancer at stage 1 or 2, the prognosis is way better than if you diagnose it later. That's a thesis. Now, there's a lot of science that has to go behind that. Now, that's where the jockey comes into play. And does the jockey have the right mindset to be able to take that thesis and parlay that into an outcome, right? And that's betting on the person. So the thesis is the thesis, right? By definition. And so, but the two have to be married together, right? I'll give you another example. I mean, there's this whole AI boom going on, right? Everyone knows about NVIDIA and, what is achieved. Now, the problem that I believe is not just a compute problem, it's an energy problem. You just have limited energy on the planet. Everything that is electronic needs energy. You just don't have enough energy to drive the compute needs for AI. So which means that the old way of doing compute, aka GPUs, will just not work. I mean, a GPU is a GPU. You can't suddenly say it's something different. So if you go down to first principle problem and say, let me try to go design systems for inference in this case, because AI, the two aspects of AI is training is a cost center, inference is a profit center. We make money inferencing, right? So if you fundamentally change the way inference is done and don't use old school, what I call old school ways of solving this problem by using multipliers in silicon, but you use, say, adders in silicon, log math, right? Which is humans actually compute in log space, and very few people maybe don't understand that actually, or understand that it's done in log space. If you can do that, you have now solved for a fundamental problem. Can I get 10 times more compute for the same envelope of energy? If you can solve for that problem, you have now solved for two things, right? You solve for the energy problem, and you solve for this AI boom that's happening. And if you looked around all the hyperscalers, they're all losing money on CapEx, right? The cost per token, a token is no different than a drop of oil, right? Whether I pull the oil in South Texas, Venezuela, or Russia, it's a drop of oil. But if I can get a drop of oil at 1/10 the cost in South Texas versus Venezuela, who's making money? I'm making money. So that's a first principle problem, right? It's a very hard way to look at it. And, that's what excites me, Amir. I don't want to go look at yet another social media platform, because I don't have the expertise, and I don't think that's differentiated. Now, I'm biased. I'm very biased, as all human beings are.
Yeah, and I love it. I think the question that we started with is when you do look at yourself and your career as a venture capitalist, obviously, probably some of the metrics that I would imagine within the VC space that people want to look at is the number of exits, the number of unicorns, dollar amount, all those things, right? I think those are all pretty standard metrics to look at a fund, an individual, venture capitalist. I guess for you personally, you're looking at these bigger problems. You're trying to see and understand where the needle gets moved for these type of first principle problems. When it's all said and done, however long you want to do this for, 5, 10, 20, 30 more years, whatever it might look like for you, is it going to be the metrics that would make you happy? Is there something else? What is it that you want to look back to and go, you know what, that's why I moved into the VC lane?
I think another fantastic question. I think, look, as I told you, I'm an immigrant. I'm very fortunate to have been at the right place at the right time, and got lightning to strike multiple times. And for me, it's not about the economic. Of course, it is don't get me wrong. In the venture world, it is about economics, because I have people who have given me and entrusted their money, and I have to be able to give them the return. But during that journey, what is the satisfaction that I can get out of it, right? Will I be able to work with people that I can, when I'm in my rocking chair, say, you know what, I was part of that journey. That's extremely satisfying for me, right? Personally. And by the way, I'm an LP in my own fund, right? So sure, we as venture capitalists expect to make money. But if I can look back, and I'm not looking for accolades at all, far from it, right? If that person or group of people will say, you know what, he was part of the journey, and that one piece of advice he gave me, or the one piece of wisdom he gave me, changed my life, changed the outcome, I'd be so satisfied. And a perfect example of that was, when Juniper did well, we all did financially very well. But the biggest satisfaction I got was when my admin had tears in her eyes and said, now I can go buy my own house and send my kids to a private school. Imagine that, right? You can do that. Now, with the ability of money, the only currency we have is money, which is easy. And the second one is the gray cells we have in our heads as VCs. Can I employ the gray cells to give them that satisfaction is what I'm looking for. So when I'm in my rocking chair, I can look back and say, you know what, I was part of that small journey that made X, Y, and Z doing whatever they were doing happy and successful.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I think when we're as I've been listening to you go through stories, and I've been hearing some of the personal goals within the lane of being in venture capital, and obviously your own experience of leveraging being a founder as well. When you look at that, and you mentioned AI, and I guess an AI question can't hurt here because I'd like your feedback. Everyone has one, but we're at a very interesting time and place where there's lots of dollars going into AI as a race. Both a sprint and a marathon. I feel like it's a very unique situation because I feel like there's a sprint that's happening among some people, there's a marathon happening amongst others, and there's people all in between the race and the landscape. And there's this convergence of first principle problems, subject matter expertise, and now these new tools that could potentially bring some of those down. When you look at this market and you're trying to understand where to deploy capital, who's the right jockey, who's solving that first principle problem, and how do they see AI, maybe generative AI, as a way of breaking those problems down that might have been challenging before? Have you had to change the way you operate? Is your thesis the same? Has this caused any alterations in going, the problem can be potentially solved differently now that we have a different tool set? Just out of curiosity.
That's a fantastic question. Well, if you know the answer to that, please tell me, right? I mean, it's evolving faster than one could think, right? And in fact, no pun intended, you have machines who are thinking faster than humans today, right? I mean, you have agents talking to agents, and Mudblood just came out, and you have agents talking to each other. So it is rapidly happening. I think the winning formula, in my opinion, is just keeping an open mind. Trying to see if you can look around the corner. It's a very tough problem. This is trying to predict the future, right? I mean, if you call predict the future, we'd be in Vegas. But it is extremely, extremely hard. So, but again, you have to have some fundamental theses that you work on, right? Which is, what will the world look like? And in our case, we call it, the intelligent enterprise, right? And then you start with that, okay? What does the intelligent enterprise need to have? Simple question, right? But extremely complex answer, right? Do you need, droves of people, who are closing books? Just ask the question, right? Doesn't mean that we're against people who are, doing accounting, but questions like that, you have to ask yourself questions and be critical of those questions and critical of the answers. And then hopefully from that, you'll get this one pearl of wisdom and you say, okay, now we bet on that, or two or three. So I don't have the answer as to where AI is going. You have people who are way smarter than I, but getting on panels, getting to read what they're doing, and then from there trying to infer. And that's why I brought up this whole RNA sequencing and DNA sequencing. It's one swim lane. You have physicians, another swim lane. And pattern matching and saying, I see some pattern here, I see some pattern here. Can I put those two together? That's why we get paid what we get paid to be venture capitalists. It's not easy, right? If you looked at typical venture returns, out of 30, 40 companies in a fund, you'll have one unicorn, maybe if you're lucky, or two. And most of them are going to be singles and doubles, and you're going to have a whole bunch of strikeouts. It's okay. All we need is the one. And I'll give you this one great example. Someone I know very well, they met with Travis Kalanick the first time when Travis was pitching black cars. It wasn't what Uber is today. So let me just reflect back on what they said. They looked at it and they said, "No, we're not going to invest in this." And I asked them, "Why didn't you invest?" They said, "Because we got so mired in the fact that." Regulatory bodies, state, federal, local bodies, taxi unions and all, you'll have to go fight against them, right? But they didn't see the vision of, hey, if I can monetize something which is sitting idle 90% of the time, meaning a car, right? But it's very hard to compute that, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're focused on numbers, right? Oh, can I compete against this guy? What is the profit margin going to look like? I mean, Amazon didn't make money for the first 6 years. They were selling books. But, Kleiner Perkins saw the vision and said, no. It could be this. You're tying things together. And so it's not an easy problem to solve, Amir. Again, I didn't give you the answer on AI because I don't know the answer, but I just know AI is here to stay. Absolutely, it is here to stay.
Now, that's, I fully respect I don't think there is an answer, but I do think the genie is out of the bottle is how I view it as well. That the wheels are in motion. Where we end up, that's part of the fun. And it's interesting. You've seen all these tech, and maybe this is a final question for you. Is you have seen a number of tech innovation cycles. You've seen the boom, going back to chip design to going through
Web 1.0 to actually client-server computing. The client-server computing to web, to the cloud, to mobile phones, to now AI. I'm like, yeah, it's interesting times. And I forget which year it was. I think in the early 1900s, the patent office said everything that has to be patented has been patented. How wrong were they?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I sit here and I wonder, because I have the luxury of listening and speaking to a lot of different people, and I sometimes listen to people and I wonder if what we're missing, a little bit of trees of the forest, is it's just evolution. And I think I brought this up with somebody, and I was like, if you go back to the iPhone that changed the landscape of mobile, which changed the landscape of needing 5G. It's like this Russian doll of technologies that are all leveraging each other for the last 50. Going back to the chip design that you had for client server, leveraging data centers to talk to each other and reduce the cost. I mean, every piece of technology that's been touched in the last 70 years is built into now what we're doing now. And sometimes I just wonder, we're just seeing evolution, but because we're so sometimes close to it, it's really hard in the moment to go, it's just the next step. It's what is supposed to happen as we keep seeing innovation. It is from the wheel to here, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, but it's just evolution.
Totally. Horses became obsolete because engines came in, and you have gasoline driven engines, and now gasoline to electric. This is not going to stop. Not in my lifetime, and hopefully not in my children's lifetime and their children's lifetime. It's just going to happen, and the genie's out of the bottle, Amir. There's nothing stopping it, and especially with AI. You're going to find new drugs. You're going to find out new materials. You're going to find out new ways of things that people have not even contemplated. it's just unimaginable, right? I mean, maybe AI will invent anti-gravity, and I hope they do. That'll be a fantastic. Now, everyone's going to be skeptical, saying you're going to break Newton's laws and stuff like that. I don't know. It's going to happen.
Ashok, it's been amazing talking to you. Thank you for your time. I know
Pleasure.
you got to get back to it. If somebody does have a follow-up question, is there a good way, or just wanting to learn more, is there a good way of...
Ashok at GPV, that's Great Point Ventures, short form is gpv.com. Send me any questions, guys. Like I told you, I will, this much I will promise, I will return your question. It may not be the answer you're looking for, but you will definitely get a response.
You're fantastic. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being on.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, Ashok went through and talked to us about, his experience as a founder to becoming a VC and his thesis around wanting to look for those first principle type solutions in the market. We talked about what he's seen from investments, the Jockey, the right type of group to actually solve a problem. He gave us some fantastic advice. So share this episode with somebody who also might benefit from listening to it. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.